Yeah, it's like an addiction to the future, and the idea that the future is, which is always off in the distance by definition, that it's going to be better than the present. And then you're evaluating the present instinctually from the point of view of this idealized future that never arrives. And so then you get to the beach on vacation and you're looking forward to dinner that night. And you get to dinner that night and you're looking forward to being home in your bed. And you know, it's just like this, the goalpost just continually moves and moves and moves. And the practice, which you and I talk about all the time, we probably mentioned it in almost every episode of Dharma Lab, is to make a practice of appreciating what's right in front of you, to make a practice of savoring, like almost strengthening the muscle memory and even the brain networks that allow you to first orient to something that feels nourishing or uplifting or just something positive. Richie, a few minutes ago, I went to get a cup of coffee and I was reenacting an experience that I've had many times over where there's a disconnect between what I want and what it leads to. And I just noticed, I usually drink tea. I rarely drink coffee, and I don't drink coffee because it actually gives me heart symptoms that are very uncomfortable. I get like palpitations and anyways, I don't need to bore you with my my health complaints, but it doesn't lead anywhere good. I might have some momentary pleasure, but that's very short-lived, and then I just don't feel good at all, and I have this aftermath. And yet, I keep wanting it. I keep, I've had this is not a new thing. I've had this for years, and it was just interesting to me. So I didn't end up drinking the coffee. I'm actually drinking some black tea, which doesn't have these same effects. But as I was in the middle of this experience, I just had this moment of insight where I saw this cycle, and it made me realize something that we've seen in the research and something I wanted to ask you about, which is that instinctively we think that wanting leads to liking and enjoyment. That when we crave something, if we get the thing we crave, then we will be content and happy. Whereas what we can see from this coffee example, and we all personally, we each have probably a long list of examples of this, really craving and wanting just lead to more craving and wanting. And the more you indulge them, it tends to be even more craving and more wanting. And we can think of liking actually as its own kind of thing, like its own world. So anyways, let's.
Yeah, I was saying, and less liking.
Yeah, exactly. It leads actually to a deficit of liking and a surplus and abundance of wanting and craving, which obviously does not feel good.
For you, French fries may be an exception where you have both wanting and liking.
Hey, now you're getting a little personal, Richie. You're entering into unsafe territory, but just don't bring up nachos, and then we'll really have a.
So, yeah, but interestingly, coffee for me has the identical effects. But yeah, so there's a fascinating body of research on this, and it's at many different levels. There's a famous book that was written by a very well-known social psychologist at Harvard by the name of Dan Gilbert. The book is called Stumbling on Happiness. And the title really conveys the message of the book, which is that people think that certain things will make them happy, and yet they often will spend years cultivating that.
Yeah, a whole lifetime. I think probably most of us.
Yeah. And then when they finally get what they have been craving, it ends up really feeling quite empty. And they may get a bump in happiness, but it doesn't last. And that even applies in extreme cases. There have been studies of people who've won the lottery, who were sort of ordinary middle class or even lower middle class people, and they win the lottery. They suddenly get $15 million or more. And yes, there's a phasic increase, a transient increase in happiness, but it comes back down to baseline, often goes below baseline. So there's a lot of that kind of work. And then there's neuroscience work, which teaches us that some of the, in fact, a lot of the brain territory that we consider under the category of, quote, reward, is actually correlated with wanting,
Hmm.
and not with liking. And in hard-nosed neuroscientific research, scientists have been able to disentangle between the neural correlates of liking and the neural correlates of wanting. And one of the things we were sort of casually saying is actually true in experimental research, which is that as we um, want more and as the craving increases, the liking actually does go down. And this is a pattern that is often particularly apparent and extreme in people with substance abuse problems, where they'll really crave a particular drug, and they'll often, you know, devote most of their waking hours to figuring out how they're going to get their next dose, and it totally takes over their life. And then they get the dose, and it has a very transient effect, but then it leads to craving again, which is associated with a lot of agitation and negative emotion. So those are all really important studies. And it turns out that in studies in animals, and you know, we'll put aside the ethical issues here for the moment, which both of us have important concerns about. This work was not done in our center, it was done by other scientists, but these scientists were able to show that there is a place in the brain um, which seems to be specifically associated with liking, and it's a much smaller area of the brain than the territory associated with wanting. And the area associated with liking is called the ventral pallidum, probably a structure that most of you viewers have not heard about. And yet it does seem to be important, although it's so small that it's actually hard to identify in human brain scans.
This is so, there's so many interesting parallels with the meditative perspective. One of the things that one of the most common phrases you hear in the Tibetan tradition is from this text, this classical book, Richie, that you just mentioned in a previous discussion we had, which is The Way of the Bodhisattva, which the Dalai Lama and many Tibetan teachers talk about all the time. And there's a passage from that book that summarizes this perfectly. It says something to the effect of, although nobody wants to suffer, we run towards suffering like it's, our dearest friend. And although everybody wants to be happy, we flee from it like an enemy. And this is actually all a discussion of craving and how we tend to orient more to craving and wanting than we do to liking and enjoying and savoring. Thinking, and the basic fundamental mistake of the mind is somehow that the one leads to the other. That if we indulge the craving, we will get what we want, and that then should, by this faulty way of thinking, that should lead to more happiness and contentment. But what you're showing, and what the Way of the Bodhisattva and this passage is showing, is we're running in the opposite direction. We are not getting closer. We are actually heading the opposite direction of that. And so it goes to some of the most basic teachings of Buddhist meditation, which are that the starting point is getting honest with yourself. You need to get honest with yourself about how well these strategies that we all instinctually follow in our lives actually work. And what you see is that not only do these things not bring us closer to happiness, they actually keep us locked in cycles of suffering, or not always overt suffering, but I like to say it's more chronic dissatisfaction is maybe a better way of looking at it, because it's not always like you're moaning and wailing. Sometimes it's just, it doesn't feel like enough. You're just waiting for the next moment to be better than this one, or looking forward to the next experience. So it's just like the whole cycle itself is kind of broken, and it's based on this very basic faulty assumption about the link between craving and liking.
Yes. Exactly, exactly. And I think that one of the things we see in our society is people who are um, really craving the next vacation, and they're sort of living for the next vacation, thinking that that will satisfy their chronic dissatisfaction that you're talking about, Court. And, in many ways that a vacation, I think, could be really helpful in resetting, in recalibrating. But it's that same sort of expectation that some external circumstance is going to lead to some enduring change. And the research very consistently shows that that just doesn't happen.
Yeah, it's like an addiction to the future, and the idea that the future is, which is always off in the distance by definition, that it's going to be better than the present. And then you're evaluating the present instinctually from the point of view of this idealized future that never arrives. And so then you get to the beach on vacation, and you're looking forward to dinner that night. And you get to dinner that night and you're looking forward to being home in your bed. And it's just like this, the goalpost just continually moves and moves and moves. And the practice, which you and I talk about all the time, we probably mentioned it in almost every episode of Dharma Lab, is to make a practice of appreciating what's right in front of you, to make a practice of savoring, like almost strengthening the muscle memory and even the brain networks that allow you to first orient to something that feels nourishing or uplifting or just something positive. Like, I just looked outside and I can just see leaves on the ground. Like, oh, fall is here. And something I like fall. I like the crisp air. And, all these positive associations can arise. It could be the simplest thing, but to treat that as a practice, to actually practice orienting to something that feels uplifting or positive, and then savoring and nourishing that kind of space. That's the space that actually kind of strengthens that muscle memory. Whereas the craving part that we think is going to lead there is just like a false promise. It's just, the classic analogy is it's like drinking salt water, or it's like chasing a mirage. You never get there, but somehow it always feels more tantalizing. And the more you invest in chasing it, kind of the more you get stuck in this loop. So it
Yeah,
just never ends.
exactly. And there's people have often asked me about this, particularly recently. There's this wonderful work that's been done by our friend Dacher Keltner on awe. And awe is often um, studied in the context of people sort of going to beautiful
You're
natural
at the Grand
spaces.
Canyon or looking up in the stars or
Exactly. Those, really moments in nature where they're just, you see a tree that's been, that's 2,000 years old, a giant redwood. And yes, those are amazing moments. And what we're talking about now invites the possibility that it's actually possible to experience all the time, so
Mm.
to speak. It's not dependent on being in the redwoods. You can experience awe in a garbage dump. Um, and so it's really about this shift in perspective. And if we do that, then we don't really need to go seek anything, crave anything, because it's just right there in front of us.
I had this moment a few years back. You've probably heard me tell this story. I was on a plane and I was trying to get work done. You and I have talked about many times how our most productive moments in life are when we're on a plane because we don't have any meetings. There's no extraneous interruptions, and you can just zero in and get a lot of work done, which is what I tend to do. So I think I was just emptying my email inbox, and I had bought like the Wi-Fi connection, on the flight, and suddenly it was really slow. It was taking forever for the email to sync. And I had this moment of just kind of annoyance, like, oh, I'd have to just sit there and wait, which is kind of funny because I'm like meditating all the time. But for some reason, this 30 seconds I had to wait was annoying. And then suddenly exactly what you said happened. My mind just shifted. And I had this thought. I looked around. I literally just looked around the plane and I thought to myself, I'm in a metal tube tens of thousands of feet, hurtling through the air, sending a note somehow through space to somebody on the other side of the planet. Like, any one of these things would have been a complete miracle that nobody would have even believed 100 years ago. And here it is that not only am I taking it for granted, I'm even getting annoyed that my email isn't, sent in 10 seconds instead of 20 or anyways. But it was exactly that. It was just this little shift in perspective. And it shifted just into this moment of appreciation and gratitude and awe. Because I think it was just like, wow, like how, all these little things, like right now, the fact that we're having this conversation in different places, these computer screens and microphones, and people are listening to this in totally different places, like that's all just unimaginable that we can even do this. It's kind of amazing. So like you're saying, there are countless things that we could just feel not only grateful for or appreciative of, but are kind of mind-blowingly amazing if you really pay attention.
Yeah, absolutely. One way that this whole issue is beautifully captured is this brings up for me a memory of an experience I once had with the Dalai Lama. I was in Dharamsala, and we were with a Japanese scientist who I had never met before, a very interesting guy. And somehow the three of us ended up in a room together just alone. It was me, this Japanese scientist, and the Dalai Lama. And this was the very first time the Japanese scientist met the Dalai Lama. And he said to the Dalai Lama in a very innocent way, he said, "Your Holiness, can you please tell us about the time in your life when you were the most happy?" And I thought, wow, that's a really unusual question to ask the Dalai Lama. What is he going to say? And just like that, the Dalai Lama said, "I think right now."
That's great. That's such a perfect, yeah, that's such a perfect example of just this. I mean, that
Yeah, I mean,
it's just the orientation to what you have and who you're with and what you're doing, rather than the addiction to like, oh, it's going to be better. If I get through this moment, then the future will be better than the present. And I think another one of there's sort of two myths, two faulty mindsets. One we've talked about, which is the idea that craving is going to get you there, which we can all just reflect on our lives for a few minutes and see that one doesn't work out. The flip side of that is, I think, the fear that if we orient to what we have, that somehow we're going to be bereft of the things we need in life. Like we somehow won't be able to take care of ourselves, or we won't get our needs met if we don't relentlessly and compulsively chase what we perceive to be our needs and desires. But rather, it's the opposite. You can see from the Dalai Lama, there's just this feeling of abundance that tends to kind of take care of itself. It's not like you're not going to take care of yourself, but you do so feeling full rather than empty. But I think there's kind of two faulty mindsets that are almost instinctual. It's not like we're not consciously thinking it, but it's beneath the surface.
yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. And I think the fear of not having enough is really not talked about that often, and it's a pervasive driver of this. And it also leads me to suspect that introducing this perspective early in life can be very, very helpful as we develop.
Yeah, that's so true. Maybe we could end this just on a personal note. I'm curious if there's anything that you do in your own life that helps you feel that sense of abundance, that helps you connect with a sense of awe or just a simple sense of appreciation. Is there any kind of little daily rituals or that shift, things that help with that shift in perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I try to, for me, appreciation is a big thing that I've sort of elevated in my awareness when I became more appreciative of appreciation. And, I would say that probably in the last maybe 5 or 8 years, it's been something that is much more with me. And so, I really, from the time I wake up, just appreciating a new day, an opportunity to be of greater benefit. I remind myself, I'm here to really scale well-being, and that's why we're doing Dharma Lab. And then little things. every meal is an opportunity to appreciate all the people who came together to help make that possible. Before I come into work, just reflecting on all these people who are dedicating their lives. They could be working in an industry and probably making twice as much as they're making, but they're choosing to be here for a reason, and that's because they're really mission driven. And really appreciating the sacrifice that they're making. And, just there's a relentless world of opportunity and just trying to tune into as much of that as possible. But there's so much out there that if we just wake up to it, it's there, even in terrible situations. You can find these little nuggets to appreciate that are heartwarming and really help, I think, instill a sense of hope, even in the face of real adversity.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And it reminds me of that shift in perspective that you're talking about. Even when I'm having an emotional reaction or somebody else is reactive and perhaps even doing something that's not so healthy or kind or whatever, even in those moments, there are these little things that you can tune into. For example, I notice if I'm ever reactive or stressed out, that I can see, oh, actually, this is my nervous system, my brain, my conditioning, just trying to protect itself in an overwhelming or difficult situation, or this person who might be lashing out. Like, it's just a protective mechanism. That's not to say it rationalizes harmful behavior. It doesn't mean you become a doormat or that it's advocating that. But you can see that even at the root of these more dysfunctional behaviors and dysfunctional ways of being in the world, there's actually something quite wholesome in that. And you can orient to that. And again, you can still see the unhealthy stuff, but you're not just only seeing that. So you can see the full human being, even when something is not healthy. And for me, maybe just to close on something that I've found really, really powerful is, in addition, to what you shared, Richie, which is just noticing these things, is I've really tried to make a habit of expressing appreciation and sometimes just telling people randomly just things I like and appreciate that about them. And oftentimes I get the same response, which is like, where did that come from? Like, why did you just tell me that? And I usually just say, I just was thinking it and I just wanted to tell you that. And they're like, okay, but I can always tell that, it elicits a little, of course it feels good to feel seen, to feel valued, or to know that somebody else is seeing you in a positive light. And so it can be the littlest thing. Like, I love your sense of humor. Like, it always brightens the room, or I always appreciate you just jump in and lend a helping hand. And just saying those little things to people, it's such a tiny thing, but I feel like it's almost viral. Like, I can see that I feel good saying it. I can see that they feel good. And I like to think in some of those circumstances, maybe they say something to somebody, or whatever interaction they have next. It just, that ripple effect continues
Yeah.
to permeate the whole environment.
Yeah. I often say that flourishing is contagious.
Exactly. Exactly. So it's such a beautiful practice. And I think it all goes back to this disconnect between craving and liking. And here the invitation, of course, is just to orient to and to make more space for the liking, the savoring, the enjoying, the contentment, and to let the craving, not to index on that being the solution. So yet another interesting conversation, another one I'm sure we'll pick up on in other ways. But yeah, hope we can continue this. And for everyone listening, thank you. Hope you enjoyed this and you savored a little bit of our discussion today, and look forward to seeing you soon on another episode of Dharma Lab.
Thank you so much.